Hey, what's going on? I'm Patrick Jaguar, the Cosmic Alchemist. So this video I've got a mouthful for you, and what I want to do is I want to talk about some things that are going on astrologically November and December of this year, 2020. And I want to show you the parallels to some astrological events that happened in 1941, and that events that I think sort of kick-started the Pearl Harbor attacks, which were on December 7th, 1941. So basically astrological events that created a potential, an energy potential for that attack to happen. And that was a very momentous attack. That's when the Japanese Navy sailed out to Hawaii and by air bombed the U.S. Navy base at Pearl Harbor. And that's what got the United States into World War II, when it was trying to be neutral. So, and I think the things that are similar in 2020 to what happened in 1941 could create a potential for some sort of an attack here in 2020, actually on December 3rd, 2020. I think it would be some sort of a cyber attack, and it would be coming out of China. Now, if this happens, the media is not going to be honest, and they're not going to tell you, yeah, somebody in China did this, whether it was corporate hired hackers that did it, whether it was the intelligence service or the government or what. But if this happens, the origin point will be China. So what these events, in both of these years, what these events are, you had a Mars coming out of retrograde, stationing in Pisces in November, in mid-November. And then, late November, early December, in both years, you had a full moon in Taurus. So Taurus is the sign of, again, enemies, struggles, conflicts. And actually where Mars comes out of retrograde, which is in Pisces in November, Pisces is the fourth house of the United States. So it's the seat of the soul. It's all about security. It's about the home, the homeland. Pisces also deals with losses. So let's get into the particulars a little bit. So in 1941, it was November 10th, 1941. You had Mars, which had been in retrograde, coming out of retrograde and stationing at 21 degrees of Pisces. So again, that's the fourth house of the United States. So that's the home, the homeland, security, all that stuff. So it's, and Mars is volatility, violence, anger, aggression. So Mars coming out of retrograde there, it sets up, in the fourth house, it sets a potential for some sort of attack to come. So again, November 10th, 1941, Mars came out of retrograde and stationed at 21 degrees of Pisces, fourth house of the United States. So then going forward from there, on December the 3rd, 1941, you had a full moon in Taurus. And again, Taurus for the United States is the sixth house, and the sixth house, enemies, conflicts, struggles. So the Mars stationing, in the fourth house, it creates that potential for an attack at home. And by that point, Hawaii was a colony of the United States, and the United States had its fleet there, so it was Americans on their home base. So going from there to then at December 3rd, 1941, full moon in the house of the enemies in Taurus, basically it was setting us up for our minds to be thinking about enemies and what enemies could possibly do to us. And it was gearing our minds up to start thinking about struggles and conflicts and warfare and all that stuff. And then so that full moon in Taurus in 1941 was on December 3rd. And then 4 days later, you had December 7th, you had the Pearl Harbor attack. So that's kind of the timeline for that. And you fast forward to 2020. November the 14th, Mars comes out of retrograde, stations at 23 degrees of Pisces. So 2 degrees difference, but in the neighborhood. And Mars had not had a retrograde in a station in Pisces since 1941, so there was 79 years in between. So again, 2020, November 14th, Mars comes out of retrograde and stations in Pisces, which again is the homeland for the United States, because it's the 4th house of the U.S. So again, it sets up potential for an attack at home for the United States of America. So then you go forward in time in 2020. Come to November 30th. Now on November 30th, you have not only a full moon in Taurus, which is the 6th house of the United States, but it's also a lunar eclipse. So it's a more powerful full moon than in 1941 because it's a lunar eclipse. And you've got the moon conjuncting with Rahu. So Rahu is all about illusions and deception. So, when Pearl Harbor happened, the Japanese sailed in and they launched a bunch of airplanes off of aircraft carriers, and they were all marked with the red rising sun of Japan. It was very obvious who did that attack. Now, since Rahu is going to be conjuncting the moon on November 30th, 2020, again, our minds are going to be thinking about struggles and enemies and setbacks and conflicts. But since Rahu is there, it's not going to be clear who the enemy is. And that's really why I'm making this video. I'm just floating the idea out there. And, when you look at in the last few years, the media has been doing all this censorship and, all this deception. And they're doing all this censorship to protect us from our own thoughts because, they're condescending and they're arrogant. And, the right wing can be very arrogant, but the left wing is arrogant in a much more condescending and sneaky and sort of passive-aggressive way. And it's interesting, like when you look at the race issue, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of racist right-wingers, but then the left is just as racist, but they do it in a condescending, kind of a sneaky way. They don't let people of color speak for themselves, and they tell people of color what's best for them and what they should be doing. So, that's an example. And the media does this too. So, when the media does this, they're protecting people from their own thoughts with all this censorship. So the whole point with that is that on November 30th, with this full moon and this lunar eclipse, Rahu is going to be conjunct the moon. So, and Rahu is deception, and the media is very deceptive right now. So it'll probably take a while. If this happens, it'll take a while before the media, it could even be years before the media admits that, yeah, this came out of China, this cyber attack or this whatever attack came out of China. And it took 40, 50 years for the Pentagon to admit that the national leadership back before World War II knew the Pearl Harbor attack was coming. But they allowed it to happen, and they actually got the new aircraft carriers out of Pearl Harbor, and they let the old antiquated ships, battleships, and all the other ships get bombed so that they'd have an excuse to build a new navy. So, it could be the same kind of thing where, we don't know for years, but I'm telling you right now, if this happens, it's going to come out of China. And since the election is being contested, China's scared because Joe Biden is the horse of the Chinese. He's been very friendly with the Chinese. And this election is all about the Democratic Party is being backed by companies that do business in China, that have manufacturing in China and want to give China their way. And then on the other side, backing the Republicans, you have the American oil money and American manufacturing. So it's just a conflict between vested interests. It's not about your favorite candidate fighting for you and telling you the truth. It's your favorite candidate is actually fighting for vested interests. But there's been a lot of treason going on with all this business being done in China. It's like how the head of the chemistry department at Harvard was arrested for espionage because he was giving intellectual property to China. So basically the university system was a back door for the Chinese into the United States. And one of his research assistants at Harvard was a Chinese intelligence officer who lied on her visa application and said she was a grad student. So there's some serious shit going on with espionage and deception. So it's crazy times. So anyway, yeah. If China carries out some cyber attack or somebody in China, it's going to take a long time before that gets admitted. So just for the recap, just like 1941, mid-November, you get Mars coming out of retrograde in the 4th house of the United States. So it's potential for an attack on the American home. And then a couple weeks later, you get the full moon in Taurus, which is the house of enemies and conflicts for the United States. But now this year in 2020, it's not only a full moon, but again, it's that lunar eclipse, and Rahu is the one causing the eclipse. So it's, a lunar eclipse is the darkening of the moon to show us a truth. But there's also some deception, woven in. And, on eclipses, people don't always take the opportunity to see the truth. Sometimes they double down on the delusions that they've bought from the media. So the final piece to this, you get, again, in both years, you get mid-November, you get Mars stationing coming out of retrograde in Pisces, 4th house, the homeland and security of the United States. A couple weeks later, the full moon in the 6th house of the United States, which is enemies, conflicts. But then in 2020, you get this eclipse, especially with Rahu, the deceiver. Now in 1941, that full moon in Taurus in the 6th house of enemies was December 3rd, and 4 days later came the Pearl Harbor attack on December 7th. The full moon in Taurus with the eclipse in 2020 is on November 30th. So if you go 4 days forward, just like in 1941, you come to December 3rd. Now the interesting thing about December 3rd in 2020 is that the transiting Mars, which is in Pisces, perfectly conjuncts Communist China's, the People's Republic of China's natal Rahu. So China's natal Rahu, Communist China's natal Rahu is at 23 degrees Pisces, 33 minutes. Interesting, you get the 33s, which is prominent in astrology and in secret societies. 30, Freemasonry is 33 degrees. So it's a magic number too. It's a trinity of 11s, and 11 is the number of power, of infinite potential. So December 3rd, transiting Mars conjuncts China's natal Rahu. Now, Rahu is the trickster god of the Vedic pantheon, just like Loki of the Norse pantheon. So tricksters do sneaky things, but they do sneaky things because they care so much about evolution, and they want human beings, or they want the other gods to grow up and evolve. So what they do is they lead us into ego traps. Basically, we set ego traps for ourselves, and they entice us into the traps that we set for ourselves. So then when you get Mars and Rahu conjunct, what you get is it's a significator for organized crime, for sneaky illegal things, or sneaky attacks, or sneaky violence done in a sneaky way. So for Communist China, Pisces is the 3rd house. So the 3rd house deals with media, deals with communications, deals with computer technology. The United States, again, Pisces is the 4th house. So it's security, nourishment, seat of the soul, the home, the homeland. Now, another thing that Rahu deals with viruses. It deals with, communicable disease, kind of like pandemic type disease, and it deals with computer technology. So when you look at this, you look at the placement of Pisces in the charts of the US and China. In China, you've got Mars and Rahu, so you've got Mars as violence, volatility, warfare, attacks. With Rahu, and Rahu is viruses, it's deception, it's computer technology. That's in the third house of China, and the third house is like marketing, business, communication. It's also media. And in the United States, it's security, it's the homeland, it's the home. So it's like China, it's like media and computer technology coming out of China to create a virus or a computer virus or some sort of cyber attack that targets the American home, the American homeland. So a lot of things, it could be like a cyber attack and a computer virus. We could learn more about where COVID actually came from. I don't think COVID came from some guy eating a bat. The highest security biolab in China is 20 miles from Wuhan. And, scientists open Pandora's boxes and they play with things they shouldn't play with. So I think somebody was studying viruses in a lab and they were creating different types of flus to study them, and things get out of laboratories, and it's been happening for years where a lab thinks security's great and it's not, and something gets out. Could have been a bat that was infected with it as a test subject got out. But in any case, we're going to see, there's potential here to see something new happen to the United States coming from China. I'm saying it's most likely a cyber attack, some sort of computer virus done intentionally, because again, the election is disputed and the Chinese want to protect their candidate. They want to protect Joe Biden, and he's been very friendly with the Chinese. His son has done business there. Nancy Pelosi's son is a business associate of Joe Biden's son, Hunter. So, both political parties in the United States have gotten in bed with China and taken dirty money from China, but the Democratic Party is especially friendly with the Chinese. So the Chinese have more money bet on them. So this cyber attack, the purpose of it could just be to shut the internet down, to stifle the news about basically the Trump campaign contesting the legality of some of the election results. So this could be really interesting. In China, the military command wrote a paper called, I just lost the name of it, Unrestricted Warfare. And so it's all about how, and this was written back in '99, it's about how China can't defeat the United States on the battlefield, so they need to do it through asymmetric means like drug trafficking, election rigging, media interference, creating fake news stories to shape public opinion, all kinds of things like that. So, it's part of China's game plan. It's just, they undermine us because they can't beat us on the battlefield. And, there's a lot of conflicting interests, financially and commercially. So, when you look at the charts of the United States and China next to each other, they're very antagonistic. And it's like, when you're just looking at the charts, it's like China is always gaining something by the losses of the United States. So, when you look at China's 11th house, it's Scorpio. Scorpio is like, it's things done in secret, things done in hidden places under the surface. That's China's 11th house. So the 11th house is financial gain. So China gains financially by doing very secretive, sneaky things. Scorpio is the house of losses in the 12th house for the United States. So China loses when, United States loses when China gains financially. I mentioned the 3rd and the 4th house already. You want to look at Taurus. Taurus is the 6th house of enemies for the United States, and Taurus is the 5th house of politics for China. So China's politics are antagonistic to the United States. What was the other thing I wanted to look at? I think that was it. But yeah, I could go really deep into those charts, but I'm running on here. But just to recap this whole thing, 1941 and 2020. Again, you have Mars coming out of retrograde in Pisces, which is the 4th house of the United States. So it's the homeland, it's the sense of security. So Mars comes out of retrograde there, creates potential for some sort of attack on the American home. And then a couple weeks later, in both years, you get a full moon in Taurus, which is the 6th house of the United States, again, which is enemies, conflicts, struggles, setbacks. And then 4 days after that full moon in 1941, you come to December 7th. So the full moon was December 3rd in 1941. You come to December 7th, you get Pearl Harbor Day, when the Japanese Navy bombed Pearl Harbor, sank a bunch of ships. 2020, you get the full moon is a few days sooner. It's on November 30th, 2020. Full moon in Taurus, also with an eclipse, a lunar eclipse. Also with Rahu, the deceiver. 4 days forward from that, you count 4 days forward, just like from the full moon to Pearl Harbor Day in 1941. You come 4 days forward in 2020, you get to where transiting Mars meets China's Rahu. Again, Rahu, the deceiver, significator of diseases, viruses, computer technology. So it's really uncanny timing. And China is, I don't care what anybody says in the media, when I learned a lot about China, as a brief period as an intelligence officer. China is the biggest adversary to the United States. This is because China's business is so, it's innervated, it's woven its way into American business, into the American educational system. So it's that whole thing, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. China has been keeping us very close. People say the biggest adversary is Russia. That's total bullshit. Russia's business interests are very independent and separate. Russia does business with, was doing business with Ukraine till, Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, CIA overthrew the government in Ukraine using, CIA. But Russia was doing business with Ukraine. Russia does business with India. Russia does a lot of business with China, but they keep the Chinese at an arm's length. And the Russians keep the United States at an arm's length because they know that American business would do to Russia what Chinese business has been doing to America. So the greatest adversary is China, especially with the whole, the interests in the South China Sea. A lot of Navy ships coming close to each other and planes doing flybys. But yeah, we are the enemy that China has been keeping close. So, yeah, don't be surprised if you see some sort of cyber attack. This is not an exact science. There's a lot of art to this, but don't be surprised if you see it. And if there is a cyber attack, the media is going to say it was the Russians or the Iranians or the right-wing terrorist hackers. It's the Chinese, and if it's not the Chinese government or the Chinese intelligence service, then they hired a private hacker to do it. So that's the deal with that. So another thing I want to add too is I don't foresee this being a very successful cyber attack if it happens that way. Or if it's like a biological attack, I don't see it happening successfully either, because going forward for the rest of the year, going into early 2020, until April, May, the markets are actually doing really good, the way I see it. So if this happens, it's not going to be the cyber attack that crashes the economy. It's not going to do well, I don't think, at all. It's not in the stars, because the stars show that the market's doing well. Second half of 2021 is a whole other story, but we'll talk about that some other time. So if you want to see how these times and these events affect you specifically, you can get a Vedic astrology reading with me. We can see how these transits affect you personally, how they affect things in your chart. These readings are also a great way to just take a new look at yourself, take a different look at yourself, maybe discover some hidden talents. They help you to sort of reaffirm things you already knew about yourself, but to have more confidence about them. I also do rune readings. It's a great way to take a snapshot of your mind and see where the blockages are and things that are preventing you from getting more of what you want out of life. I also have some Qigong, not DVDs, but videos for sale for download. Qigong is a great mind-body practice. It helps you to calm the mind, relax, tune into the natural environment, into the spiritual forces in the universe, and really just helps you to know yourself better and get deeper into yourself. And with all the readings I do, I give people a custom meditation, a custom mantra. The Qigong is a great primer because it gets you in touch with your energy. And the mantras are a programming language. It's like a system update for the operating system of your mind. So when you do an energy practice, like a Qigong or a yoga, before doing mantra work or meditation, it's a deeper and better quality of meditation. So anyway, thanks for tuning in, and talk to you later. Have a good one.